Amidst the joy of welcoming our little daughter into the world, my life took an unexpected turn. My husband, Dylan, whom I had always known as a loving and reliable partner, shockingly declared his intention to divorce me. This revelation came while he was openly in the company of his mistress, and his arrogance during the announcement was palpable. He calmly stated his plans to move abroad with his mistress just a few months after our daughter's birth, leaving me stunned and heartbroken. Dylan's proposal was harsh and unilateral. He offered me the house and suggested we split our other assets. In return, he expected me to take full responsibility for our children and also for our aging parents, who had become my family too over the years. As he laid out these terms, it felt as though he was doing me a favor. Despite the abrupt end to our marriage and his clear disregard for the emotional turmoil he was causing throughout this ordeal, I remained silent, absorbing the gravity of his words. But what truly infuriated me was his blatant disregard for our newborn daughter. He seemed to overlook the profound impact his decisions would have on her life and well-being. However, I am not without resources or resolve. In response to his propositions, I firmly declined both the house and the division of assets under his terms. Dylan mocked me, questioning how I would manage without the financial security he was leaving behind. Little did he know, I had a plan of my own. A secret strategy that would soon reveal who was truly underestimated in this situation. I am Rebecca, a work-from-home professional, living what was once a harmonious life with Dylan and our newborn daughter, Sarah. Before our marriage, Dylan was a completely different person. We traveled extensively, shared household responsibilities, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. During my pregnancy, he was attentive and caring, often going out of his way to comfort me during bouts of morning sickness or sudden food cravings. His joy at becoming a father was evident when he enthusiastically stocked up on baby supplies for our daughter's arrival. However, the future I had once envisioned with Dylan began to crumble shortly after I gave birth. My health declined, leading to an extended hospital stay. Just when I was discharged and looking forward to returning home with Sarah, I was met with another surprise. Dylan's parents were at our house, not just for a visit, but moving in permanently. A decision made without my knowledge or consent. This sudden change added to the strain of our already altered family dynamics. As I navigated these challenging times, it became clear that the path forward would be one of self-reliance and empowerment. Despite Dylan's assumptions and the complexity of the situation, I was determined to protect my interests and those of our daughter, ready to face whatever lay ahead with strength and dignity. Before our parenting journey began, I hadn't interacted much with my in-laws since our wedding. However, as we started to navigate the challenges of new parenthood, my husband Dylan approached me with a proposal that was hard to ignore despite the suddenness. He explained that his parents were facing financial difficulties. His father had unfortunately gambled away his retirement savings, and his mother, having been a homemaker all her life, found herself without any financial security. Dylan, who had left home for high school and hadn't visited much, now felt a strong urge to support them in their time of need. Dylan suggested that having his parents move in with us could be mutually beneficial. They could assist with childcare, which would lessen our burden and help us manage our new roles as parents. Although I was initially taken aback by the fact that he had already set the wheels in motion during my extended hospital stay, his parents had sold their house and were ready to move in, I eventually saw the logic in his plan. Reluctantly, I agreed, swayed by the potential support and Dylan's earnest plea. At first, things seemed promising. I anticipated that living together would mean shared responsibilities and support with housework and childcare. However, the reality was starkly different. My in-laws, initially humble, soon began to impose traditional gender roles, insisting that housework was solely my duty and not Dylan's. They rarely contributed to household chores or childcare, often spending their days idly. My mother-in-law frequently demanded that I purchase luxurious items for her, like expensive nail polish, without considering our financial limitations. My father-in-law, still caught up in his gambling habits, often asked for money, which further strained our finances. Their attitude turned from passive to outright disrespectful when they rebuked me for questioning their spending habits, calling me inconsiderate. Dylan, caught between his desire to help his parents and the reality of the situation, found himself giving in to their financial demands to avoid conflict. This arrangement, which was supposed to bring us closer and ease our burdens, instead brought stress and tension into our home. Over time, the dream of a supportive family unit crumbled, revealing the challenges of living with in-laws who not only failed to contribute but also exploited our generosity. Rebecca's life had taken a drastic turn since her husband, who used to be caring and attentive, grew distant and critical. This place is a mess. The laundry isn't even folded. What have you been doing all day? At least do the cleaning properly. I don't want to come home to such a dirty house, he complained bitterly. His late returns from overtime work and social gatherings had become more frequent. Now, he barely engaged in any household chores or childcare. Rebecca struggled to recall the last time he had held their daughter. The man she had married seemed to have vanished. The only solace Rebecca found amidst the escalating demands of single-handedly managing the household and caring for her in-laws was in her crafting, a hobby she had treasured even before these trying times began. Chronically sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, her mind often felt clouded, and she focused merely on surviving each day without harboring any bitterness. Then, one evening, after she had put her daughter to bed and was returning to the living room, Rebecca heard a message notification. She noticed that Dylan's smartphone was illuminated on the table. He had left it there before going to take a bath. Although she initially resisted the urge to look, the phone rang again, sparking her curiosity. Reluctantly, she glanced at the screen and was stunned by what she saw. Thanks for today too, Dylan. I wish you could get divorced soon so we could be together every day. Shall we go on a trip next time? The messages were from another woman, and it was evident from her push for a divorce that their relationship was anything but innocent. Rebecca considered browsing more messages but hesitated as Dylan came back from the bath. However, knowing she wouldn't be able to sleep without digging deeper, she decided to wait until he was deeply asleep. Once sure he was sound asleep, she used his fingerprint to unlock his smartphone, a method he frequently used. Successfully accessing the phone, she carefully didn't wake him as she opened the messaging app. Her hope that it was all a misunderstanding quickly disappeared as she discovered more flirtatious exchanges between them. Can't wait to divorce Rebecca and be with you. I want to be with you forever. It's hard to meet without the company finding out about us. These were just a few of the damning messages that left Rebecca feeling devastated. It became clear that Dylan was involved in an extramarital relationship with a woman named Alyssa who also worked at his company. Rebecca realized this after reviewing their message exchanges that had started right around the time her in-laws moved into their home. The most recent messages indicated that they had been meeting in a hotel on days Dylan had claimed to be working late. Rebecca was devastated and unsure about the future for herself and their daughter. I had always trusted him when he said he was working late. But the idea of him being unfaithful was unimaginable. She thought. Her hands trembled as she held his phone. The very device that unveiled the harsh reality. She couldn't believe that Dylan was spending time with a colleague while she managed the house, looked after their child, and cared for his parents. The shock of this revelation was overwhelming. As she continued to peruse the messages, her heart sank even deeper when she stumbled upon a conversation about Dylan possibly transferring abroad. A plan she had known nothing about. Alyssa had expressed her wish to go with him, adding insult to injury, especially since they had a newborn daughter and he hadn't mentioned any of this to Rebecca. Discovering these plans from Alyssa's messages instead of Dylan filled her with fury. The talks of divorce in their messages further dampened her spirits. Dylan seemed keen on ending their marriage, a sentiment that quickly dissolved any remaining feelings Rebecca had for him. Facing his true intentions, she started considering initiating the divorce herself. The prospect of freeing herself from Dylan's neglect and the demands of living with his parents brought a sense of relief. Dylan, who had neglected both household responsibilities and their daughter, had lost his place in her life, and her affection for him had vanished. A month later, Rebecca took a firm step and visited a law office to start the divorce proceedings. That weekend, after Dylan returned from an outing, he gravely called Rebecca and his parents into the living room. As they gathered, Alyssa walked in behind him. "Hello. I'm Alyssa. I'm in a relationship with Dylan," she declared boldly, looking around at their shocked faces. Rebecca stood there, completely taken aback by her brazenness. Could hardly fathom that he would bring his mistress into our home. It was utterly shocking. As my in-laws stood frozen in disbelief, Dylan casually put his arm around Alyssa and announced, "I'm moving overseas for a job, and Alyssa will be coming with me. I plan to divorce Rebecca. As for Sarah, I don't need her, so Rebecca can keep her." While I knew about his plans for the transfer and the divorce, his heartless comment about our daughter left me and everyone else dumbstruck. I glared at him and asked, "Are you seriously saying you don't need Sarah?" "Yes. I'm serious," he responded, showing no regret. "I'm going to marry Alyssa. Thus, Sarah has no place in my life anymore, especially while I'm overseas. Despite our impending divorce, I expect you to look after my parents. They are still your family, and it's only right that you take care of them." His disgraceful remarks about our daughter and the audacious demand that I care for his parents enraged me. Amid the divorce, the idea of tending to his demanding parents was overwhelming. I'm not Dylan's servant, and it baffled me that he could even think to ask this of me. But I wasn't the only one upset by his words. Wait a minute. A transfer. A divorce. I wasn't informed about any of this. What about our life together? I challenged. You're expecting everything to be handled by Rebecca until the divorce is finalized. Can't you take responsibility for once? How can you think about leaving us after marrying that woman? You're a disgrace to our parents. As Dylan scowled with annoyance, my mother-in-law's voice escalated, and my father-in-law shot him a stern look. They had always depended on their son, yet his sudden decision to leave caught them off guard. Facing the inevitable, they seemed resigned to the fact that remaining with a soon-to-be divorced daughter-in-law held no prospects. They appeared to be aligning with him. But I was appalled that my in-laws didn't denounce his infidelity and were primarily self-concerned. Not surprising, given how they had exploited me. Please, stop arguing. Our conversation isn't over. I cut in as my husband and his parents started bickering. I positioned myself between them, briefly halting the conflict. As the room fell silent, I turned to my husband. We should discuss this calmly. We're talking about divorce. Right. All right. Let's go through with it, he replied. At that, Dylan and Alyssa held hands with glee. Now we can marry each other, they declared in unison. Dylan, gripping her hand and with a self-satisfied grin, addressed me. You'll take care of my parents. And in exchange, I'll leave this house to you, Rebecca. I'll even split the assets. Out of pity for you. I grimaced at his condescending tone, as he seemed to think he was being magnanimous. But I had already decided. I accept the divorce, but reject both your proposals. What? How will you manage without the house or the assets? Are you foolish, Rebecca? Dylan is being generous. They mocked me derisively. Offer me this house. Who's the real fool here? I shot back. It's time to clarify things. It appears you've forgotten, but this house came from my grandfather. The title is still in my name. In the midst of our heated discussion, I had to remind my soon-to-be ex-husband that he did not have the authority to decide about the house. The property was, after all, in my name, a fact he seemed to have momentarily forgotten. I had inherited the house before we were married and before we even moved in together. Dylan himself had once acknowledged that since the house was part of my family inheritance, we should take good care of it. However, it appeared he had also forgotten that commitment. Moreover, I made it clear that if we were to divide the property, I would be at a disadvantage, something I had no intention of allowing. Despite earning less than me, Dylan seemed to belittle my concerns, looking down on me as if I were making an unreasonable fuss. Living together, it was astonishing to realize how little he knew about my financial contributions. Since retiring from my full-time job to focus on raising our child, I had been successfully running an online shop that sold handcrafted accessories, a venture I started with a friend during my pregnancy. Crafting had always been a hobby of mine, and with ample time on my hands, opening an online store seemed like a natural progression. My background in marketing had helped us thrive. We positioned our products as unique, bespoke items, taking custom orders and striving to meet our customers' exact needs. While initial sales were slow, they steadily increased and eventually exceeded those of my husband, Dylan. He was astonished when he learned how much I was making. Why didn't you tell me about this? He asked. You never asked, I pointed out, highlighting his disinterest in our financial affairs, a negligence on his part. Not mine. Recently, I had been covering most of our expenses since his parents' lavish lifestyle, funded by gambling and shopping sprees. had drained our savings. Previously distracted by his affair, Dylan hadn't noticed our shrinking financial reserves, which we once managed on his salary alone. Given these circumstances, sharing our assets would mean a loss for me. So discussing the division of property was out of the question. As I laid out my reasoning, Dylan, flustered yet trying to stay composed in front of his mistress, merely nodded. Okay. No need for property division, he conceded, attempting to appear unfazed. Once he agreed, I promptly brought out the divorce papers I had prepared in advance and placed them in front of him. Sign these now, I urged. Dylan was visibly shocked, both by the swift presentation of the documents and by their preparedness. I handed him a pen, giving him no room to question the proceedings. Fortunately, I had anticipated this. It's good we're settling this before your overseas assignment, I commented. This way, neither your parents nor I will have to deal with each other anymore. My statement made it clear I had no intention of supporting his parents after the divorce, leaving Dylan and his family stunned by the consequences. Once he signed, I would be free of any ties to them. Realizing the house was now in my name, they were about to lose their home as well. Before his parents could object, I pressed him to sign, and after carefully reviewing the documents, he did. With a relieved smile, I turned to my soon-to-be former in-laws and Dylan, who stood silently by, frozen and immobile. I asserted, since this property is now under my ownership, I would appreciate it if those who have no relation to me would leave. If you choose to stay, I will have to notify your employer about your affair. Concerned about the repercussions, Dylan quickly ushered his parents and his mistress out, leaving only my cherished daughter and me. At last, the house was shrouded in peace. 6 months post-divorce, a weary Dylan called me, evidently facing troubles at work. After our separation, his parents had moved into a dingy apartment, while Dylan had moved in with his mistress. Perhaps feeling unburdened by his in-laws, Dylan seemed eager to start afresh. However, as he planned to relocate overseas, his in-laws, fearing abandonment, incessantly contacted his company. Their continuous calls ultimately prompted the senior management to revoke his transfer as they disclosed the details of our divorce and his affair, arguing that his departure would leave them in dire straits. The affair became well known within his company, tarnishing his reputation and leading to the withdrawal of his transfer offer. Furthermore, an internal probe revealed inappropriate use of company email for arranging dinners and hotel stays with his mistress. As a result, not only was Dylan's chance for an overseas assignment lost, but he was also reassigned to a more remote office location. The affair became a hot topic within his company, and he faced significant professional setbacks. Rebecca found herself in a complicated situation as her ex-husband, Dylan, who had previously initiated their divorce to move in with his mistress, now pleaded over the phone for her support. It was striking to hear such requests from a man who had seemingly discarded his family for another relationship. Despite Dylan expressing his need for her, Rebecca was resolute in her independence, emphasizing that instead of her support, Dylan would need to continue paying child support. As Dylan mentioned missing their daughter, Sarah, and his desire to spend time with her, Rebecca was repulsed by his late regrets. She reminded him sharply of his previous assertions that he didn't need his daughter. She told him not to forget those harsh words he had once said to Sarah, insisting that if he genuinely missed her, he should prove it by fulfilling his financial responsibilities toward her. Their conversation turned emotional as Dylan, amidst tears, agreed to Rebecca's terms regarding the child's support. Meanwhile, his personal life continued to unravel. The woman he left Rebecca for was facing severe workplace bullying due to the affair, leading to her resignation and subsequent illness. This chain of events highlighted the consequences of her actions and lack of judgment. As Dylan's new relationship crumbled, he found himself moving temporarily back to his parents' modest apartment. However, faced with the possibility of their own financial insecurity, his parents took a significant amount of his money and vanished. Dylan, desperate and betrayed, contacted Rebecca to inquire if she had any information about their whereabouts. But she was clueless and kept out of it. Resolute in his decision, Dylan planned to involve the police, unwilling to forgive the betrayal. On the other hand, Rebecca's life was on an upward trajectory. She managed a successful online shop with a friend and devoted herself to raising her daughter. Free from the turmoil of her past relationship with Dylan and his family, she found greater comfort and freedom. Her daughter, growing up happy and adorable, was her primary focus and joy. For their sakes, Rebecca was determined to move forward and continue thriving in her new, independent life. Do you have any thoughts after hearing this story? Tell us in the comments section. Next, to give you another story. Let's continue to see it. Jenny, a housewife in her 30s, was busy raising her middle school son, James, and had been married to David, who was 3 years older than her, for 15 years. Both had started their careers at the same company, where David had initially been Jenny's mentor. As the years passed, they both advanced professionally and held esteemed positions. Although their once intimate relationship had grown distant and communication at work was minimal, one day, an increasingly aloof David presented Jenny with a completed divorce application. Slamming it onto the desk, he bluntly expressed his dissatisfaction, accusing her of neglecting her appearance and not putting effort into their marriage since the birth of their son, declaring he had had enough. Shocked and wounded, Jenny shot back, insisting on compensation for her years of commitment, which led David to scornfully call her greedy and doubt her capability to raise their son by herself. Amid this painful confrontation, Jenny found herself reminiscing about the early, happier days of their relationship, wondering how fate had brought them together only to drift apart as David prioritized his career, leaving her feeling increasingly alienated. Meanwhile, David had recently become the leader of a team that included Susan, a competent and skilled colleague 10 years his junior. Susan quickly grew to be more than just a protégé. She became a close confidant to David. Despite the age gap, David felt a strong bond with her and often supported her, sharing lunches and after-work drinks, particularly on challenging days. On a day when Jenny left work on time for once, she realized she had left her smartphone in the office. Normally, she would have called David, who often stayed late, to bring it home. However, without her phone, she couldn't contact him or anyone else. Mixed feelings of loneliness and exasperation washed over her as she decided to head back to the nearly deserted office to retrieve her phone. unaware of the shifts occurring in her personal life. When she reached the office, she found it unusually quiet and noticed David was not there. Phil, a colleague, approached her and remarked, "That's unfortunate. But what perfect timing," as he handed her an item. "Can you take this with you? It's your husband's train card." "Yes. I found it lying around. David left earlier. You'll need it tomorrow," Phil informed her. "Good morning," I greeted my husband thankfully. He seemed to have more free time at work lately. I glanced at my smartphone, there were no messages from him. Changes at work happen often. And his phone battery frequently dies. So maybe that was why I hadn't heard from him today. With that thought, I decided to go straight home with the items we'd forgotten. If my husband was already home, I'd need to start dinner. As I walked, I planned our meal with the ingredients we had in the fridge. "Mom, welcome home. I'm home too. Sorry I'm late. I'll start on dinner right away." When I arrived, however, my husband was still out. I checked my phone again, but there were no new messages. I wondered where he could be. Curiosity growing, I began to prepare dinner. Time waits for no one. And as an adept housewife, I managed to put together a decent, presentable meal. Yet, by the time we finished eating, he still hadn't come back. "He's late, isn't he?" I mused as I cleaned up and settled down with a cup of coffee. The words just slipped out. I hadn't intended to say that. But then James, my son, caught me off guard with his response. "Isn't Dad cheating again today?" Shocked by his blunt question, he looked regretful and embarrassed as he continued. "Mom, didn't you realize?" He hesitantly divulged further details, confirming my uneasy suspicions. "You know, I think it's sort of a gut feeling. One of my friends recently got a girlfriend and he's been over the moon. Similar to Dad's behavior. So I put two and two together. That makes sense. I've also noticed that Dad has been quite secretive." I mused, pondering over his observations and our current predicament. Our workplace isn't necessarily harmful, but it does often demand late hours. I hadn't seriously considered why my husband was frequently late. Perhaps I was deliberately overlooking it. Reflecting on it now, there were instances when a strange fragrance lingered on his clothes after he returned home late, under the guise of working overtime. I exhaled deeply, trying to organize my swirling thoughts. With all these doubts surfacing, I couldn't go on pretending everything was normal. Moreover, I didn't want my son, James, to continue shouldering the weight of our family's secret concerning his father's unfaithfulness. James appeared deeply distressed by his knowledge. "Thank you for letting me know. Leave the rest to me," I managed to say calmly, hiding the storm of emotions inside me. Feeling uncertain yet compelled, I decided to hire a private detective agency to get to the bottom of this. After what felt like an eternity, the detective's findings confirmed my worst fears. My husband was indeed involved in an affair. The shock hit me hard when I found out who it was with. "You're kidding, right?" I exclaimed, my initial reaction bordering on incredulous laughter. It was Susan, a colleague I had mentored and grown to genuinely care for. The idea that she had been secretly involved with my husband for 6 years was astonishing. As I reflected on the times I spent mentoring her, I wondered if she had been deceiving me all along. Was she sharing a laugh with my husband behind my back? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Thoughts of revenge started to cloud my judgment. Then, one day, while I was still processing everything, my husband bluntly stated, "I'm getting married to someone who works under me. Let's get a divorce." Dropping the completed divorce papers on the desk, he insulted me further by saying that I hadn't looked after myself since our son was born and that he was tired of it. "All right. I see," I replied, maintaining my composure. "You're not surprised by this? Or are you actually happy that I'm the one asking for a divorce?" he pressed. I didn't agree outright, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to let this go without a fight for fair compensation. While I didn't mind divorcing David, I wasn't about to make it easy for him and satisfy his ego. My provocative response visibly upset him, and as my love for him dwindled, I watched his frustration grow. "You're such a greedy woman. You can't even raise our son by yourself. So don't get all arrogant," he retorted angrily. "Say what you want, but I have every right to child support and compensation. I'm not the villain here, it's all on you. You're always so resistant," he shot back. "Whatever. Just make sure to sign those papers and submit them," he snapped, slamming the divorce documents on the desk a few more times before storming out, likely off to Susan's. As he checked his phone, his expression seemed to soften. For me, he is now just a stranger, and I couldn't care less about his actions. The next morning at work, as usual, Susan approached me with a cheerful demeanor. "Hi, ma'am," she exclaimed, flashing her typical smile. I attempted to reply as normally as possible, but my lips involuntarily twitched. Yet, she didn't seem inclined to maintain her facade either. As she drew nearer, her smile faded, replaced by a smug sneer. "Ugly. David finally told you about us. Huh. Sorry for taking your husband." Facing such betrayal, I resolved to deal with the situation with grace and ensure my rights were protected amid the fallout. It was an exceedingly awkward moment at work when an older lady leaned close, whispering provocatively. The scent of her perfume unmistakably matched the one I detected on my husband. Clearly, this was a deliberate provocation. But I was determined not to display my emotions. I wouldn't grant her that satisfaction. Keeping my composure, I calmly informed her that while I would avoid personal confrontations, I was fully prepared to take legal action if necessary. David said, "You're quite the opportunist, aren't you? Doesn't it bother you to ask for money from a dedicated team member like me?" she taunted, aiming to rattle me further. "Not in the slightest. Now, shouldn't you be focusing on your work? You have plenty of tasks to address today, don't you?" I replied, maintaining an even tone. Susan, taken aback by my resolute response, appeared visibly upset. It seemed she still had some maturing to do. Left in the wake of our exchange were me and the curious glances of our colleagues. Among them was my husband, his gaze fixed on Susan with a concerned expression, as if she were the aggrieved party. I couldn't help but wonder, Did he really see her as the victim here? It was utterly absurd. I sighed deeply. If he really believed her innocent facade, then he clearly lacked insight into the true feelings of women. Susan needed a lesson on the professional world for women. And I was ready to be the teacher. The following week, I arrived at work early, deeply engrossed in my tasks when David walked in. It was the first time he had spoken to me since he left home with his overnight bag that Monday morning. Looking refreshed as he entered, he was met with a chilly reception at the office, which noticeably threw him off due to the frosty welcome. "Good morning," he said, looking puzzled. Right behind him, Susan appeared. It seemed they no longer cared about hiding their interactions, as both were met with cold stares from other office members. "Hey, Jenny. I hope you haven't been spreading rumors about us. That would be defamation. You know," Susan said defensively. "I don't know what you're talking about. If this bothers you, maybe you should ask around elsewhere," I replied coolly. Dismissing her insinuation, Susan tried a sarcastic comment in my direction, but I responded with equal sarcasm, making her grimace and then start typing aggressively on her keyboard. "Excuse me. I need your signature on this document," she said after a moment, attempting to regain some professionalism. "Oh. Yes. Here you go. Thank you. By the way, I wanted to ask you." "Sorry. I have another appointment. We'll talk later." "Okay." I cut her off, aware that she was looking for a chance to confront me further. Realizing she wasn't going to get what she wanted from me, Susan then turned her attention to other colleagues, likely in search of a more sympathetic ear. In the office, Phil and David were largely ostracized by their peers, including myself. Their interactions were confined to strictly professional exchanges, and any attempt at casual conversation was quickly shut down with excuses to leave the conversation. Accusations of rudeness were met with pretend ignorance and suggestions for self-reflection. When David tried to address the issue directly with me, I was at a loss for words, feeling increasingly out of place. Both Phil and David would hastily leave the office as soon as lunch break started, clearly upset by their treatment. After they left, Phil, holding his coffee, approached me. He seemed to approve of the situation, remarking on how quickly they had retreated. I agreed, suggesting they were avoiding confrontation. Phil then insinuated that I had started the rumors about them, which I denied, explaining that I had only shared Jenny's concerns over the situation with a talkative colleague, who then spread the word further. Later, Phil, the talkative colleague, and I celebrated our hard work with a lavish Italian dinner, enjoying our camaraderie. Meanwhile, the office dynamics worsened for David and Susan, leading to their gradual isolation and eventual departure from the company. I eventually sought a divorce and compensation. The drama escalated when an angry man, revealed to be another complication involving Susan, a person, burst into the office, creating a distressing scene for everyone present. The situation escalated to the point where the involvement of the police was necessary. Amid the turmoil, Susan quickly submitted her resignation, followed by my ex-husband, who seemed overwhelmed by the scrutiny when left to face it alone. My son, witnessing all of this, reassured me that such a man did not deserve our concern or attention, affirming his support for me. His disinterest in his father was his way of bolstering me. Now that they are no longer part of the company, I have returned to work feeling more driven than ever. Phil remains unchanged, but with their departure, the work environment has noticeably improved. Now, I plan to lead a joyful life, supporting one another together with my son. Do you have any thoughts after hearing the above two stories? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Tell us in the comments section. That's all for today's story. Please subscribe and give a thumb up. See you next time.